Mr. Chairman, if my calculations are right, Mr. Bell has about 15 meters of shoreline at $5,000, be $75,000 that would cost him. And you did think about cost sharing on this one?
It was brought up. It wasn't, we didn't advance that discussion any further.
I guess I'm just concerned of changing the currents and how much more of a force may be coming into Mr. Bell's property and causing damage that we think may not happen. So, not quite sure on that wording we think might not happen. It's a concern for me, but it's my concern.
Is that it, Councillor Pursuit?
Yep.
I'm going to pass the chair now and just comments. I certainly support the intent and the initiative. Watching, and I'm one of those science buffs that watch a lot of the engineering programs, and I've never seen so many when it comes to water where the engineers get it wrong in regards to currents, movement of water, and et cetera. So I guess I have concerns that that if we're not doing it continuously and we're just leaving that gap, it's not a perfect science to determine if there's any impact on Mr. Bell's shoreline. So I guess the other question is there going to be agreements built into this report that ensures that the city is held at fault if, in fact, there's advancement of erosion on Mr. Bell's private property as a result of us dealing with our own? I guess is my concern. So I'll ask that question. Is there any liability the city will take on if they're not going to take the responsibility of building the break wall right across the wall right across the property?
Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair. It's a very complicated issue there, in that if we don't do it, we're likely to cause more harm than if we do it. The property is, Mr. Bell's property is protected by his own reinforcement. Ours is not. Ours is eroding at the rate of a couple meters a year, and it is cutting back underneath his. So it's more incumbent upon us to do something. We have probably one of the leaders in the field on our team in this design. The revetment that we're proposing is either in place or being in place for Millen Shores, just adjacent, very close down the shore, and there's no concerns, or were no concerns raised there with adjacent revetments on either end of it and the way it acts. So we're fairly confident that what we're proposing will work. Is there, are we 100%? Well, like you said, with water, you're never 100%, but it's what we need to do and what the Conservation Authority and MNR will go with.
Okay, so I guess my concern is if it can be demonstrated post-project in the next number of years that has accelerated issues with Mr. Bell's property, what's his recourse? And if we don't have some form of agreement built in, then maybe it's better and cheaper to contemplate putting a continuous wall in versus leaving ourselves potentially open for ongoing liabilities in the future. And I'm just putting that out there. Either we build it into some form of an agreement and we don't build the wall, or we build the wall and you don't have to worry about that agreement. So, well, you still, I guess, have to build it in the agreement. So for those are my concerns, and I just thought I'd put it out there, and I'll take the chair back.
Okay, I have Councillor Powers to add to your list.
Councillor Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation allows the process to move forward with a 30-day appeal or review process. So what that happens is the issues raised by Mr. Bell allows those discussions to continue over the next 30 days. So if indeed there are changes that are appropriate in order to benefit Mr. Bell and other ones, those can be taken into consideration. So this is not an immediate sign-off on the thing. This is one, let's move it towards an ultimate decision, and then obviously delegated authority with the general manager in that. But I think there's sufficient issues raised that are worthy of consideration, and I'm sure Mr. Bell will be in contact with the staff almost immediately to continue those discussions. So I support the recommendation.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussions, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried. 5.3. Do you have, Councillor, I didn't see, Councillor McCaddy. This is the
Thanks.
corporate greenhouse gas report.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just one quick question. On page 3, it talks about the vehicle fleet has increased its greenhouse gas emissions by 4% over the 2005 base year. And later on in the report, and Council knows about this, it talks about the move to CNG buses, which will help on those kinds of vehicles. But I'm just wondering whether we have a strategy, whether we're working on a strategy at the staff level to bring forward on the vehicle fleet and the greenhouse gas challenges that it's providing, driving less, fewer vehicles, better vehicles. Just wondering what the strategy is for that, Mr. Chair, through you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. A couple things. In the recent corporate energy policy that was approved by Council, part of that policy introduced a new section that dealt with proposed reductions or improvements in fuel efficiency. That is intended to be worked through the Central Fleet Advisory Committee to look for newer technologies as we start to replace different components of our fleet to see if we can make them more efficient and reduce our, not only our costs, but our GHG emissions. The other project that's in front of committee that will be coming back on the September 15th with is the proposal to move transit buses back to CNG, which will help reduce GHG emissions by about 25 to 30%. The last part of that proposal was really dealing with the CNG station and the proposed arrangement that we have with Union Gas. So that's a couple areas that we're looking at right now in terms of improving the GHG emissions for the city's fleets. Of course, the increase that we saw with the city's fleet recently had to do with transit phasing out a number of the old CNG buses and replacing them with diesels. That's why we've seen that increase there.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'd feel more confident if I knew there was a strategy to kind of get at the fundamental issue, which is we're driving too much as a staff. And of course, there's a huge link there to air pollution as well. That's not in this report, but that's where most of the air pollution in the city is coming from right now, is through vehicle emissions. Of course, not just city staff, but all the vehicles and we have throughout the city, and we've seen that through Mr. Corr's work. So it seems to me that we're still working on the low-hanging fruit side of the greenhouse gas and energy portfolio. And I'm pleased there's lots more to do, and we've reached our 2020 targets early as a result, and we've got a recommendation later on in the report to go further on the energy side, which is good to see. So I'm just wondering, Mr. Chair, at what point do we actually get at some of the fundamental changes that when staff look at their work plan for the day, whether they plan their routes in such a way as to reduce the number of kilometers traveled, which reduces air pollution, reduces greenhouse gases? That would be a more fundamental response. And of course, we all have to do that. I'm not just picking on city staff. But is there any of that kind of fundamental response being talked about within staff, or are we just still working on the stuff that you've talked about, Jeff?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think with, from what I'm hearing through, our folks at Central Fleet and working with the operating groups, that they're going through a process where they continue to look for ways to improve routes, whether it be transit or whether it be some of the operating groups. That's probably part of their ongoing business. They would have to speak to that issue directly. The other area that we're looking at, to just give you a couple examples, when we have requests for new vehicles come in through the approval process, through the fleet reserve, one of the check boxes that we have there now recently added is, have you addressed the corporate energy policy? So that's to ensure that we've gone through that process of looking at the more efficient alternatives to see if there's an economic benefit of moving towards that direction. The other thing that Lionel and his team are starting to relook at is the whole issue of idling time and see where there's any fixes that we can do with that. Some of those will be a technological fix, but I'd say with it, the new addition in the policy, it's something that we're starting to focus in more and more.
And is there anybody else here that can address the reduction in kilometers being driven, or is there anybody else within fleet itself, recognizing that Jeff has the more corporate perspective on this? Is there anybody on the ground here today, Mr. Chair, who can speak to the greenhouse gas emissions going up in fleet and what the strategy is to reduce those?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll take a crack at that. I know that as part of the work that the service delivery team is doing, one of the things that they'll be considering bringing back for committee's consideration is some direction to look at right sizing, further rationalization of the fleet, making sure we have the minimum that we need to do. The minimum that we need can still do the work, really, in terms of power, things like that. So that's part of the report that will ultimately come back to council early next year, I believe. And that will consider some of the things I think you're trying to get at.
Councillor McCaddy? Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, motion to receive. Moved by Councillor McCaddy, second by Councillor Basuta. All those in favor? Carried. Any opposed? I see none. 5.4, temporary closure of King Street West from Sterling Avenue to North Orville for West Fest. Moved by Councillor McCaddy, second by Councillor Collins. All those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Now we're into standardization of fleet equipment and parts. Is there any discussion on item 5.5? Moved by Councillor Powers, second by Councillor Basuta. All those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. 5.6, Hamilton Utilities Corporation's Joint Advisory Committee report. Moved by Councillor. Oh, sorry, that's right. We took that off. Appreciate that. Hey, that's the roadmap. It's there. Delegations. We now have a delegation from Ty Tesmer from the Royal Botanical Gardens respecting rare turtle recovery, wildlife corridor issues, and roads of issues at Coots Paradise. Can I ask? Is he here? Oh, there you go. I'm going to ask Councillor Collins to temporarily take the chair. I got to make a quick call.
I do, but
Yeah, sure. Yep, we can do that.
doesn't really matter.
No? Okay.
Morning.
Sure, and I can get this.
Good morning. I am here on behalf of the Royal Botanical Gardens. Tice Teismeyer, head of natural areas. I'm familiar definitely to several of you. Earlier, well, I suppose over the last couple of years, we're talking about turtles here. And the Endangered Species Act. So the Endangered Species Act sort of creates a variety of obligations that we're still coming to terms with. The provincial version was sort of passed in 2007. One of the key items, though, is, of course, if a species is listed, you're going to then get into what's the issues challenging the particular species. That'll then create this larger document called a recovery plan for, let's say, the Blandings turtle. That would be a turtle. But then it actually goes to those who would have this particular species on their property, for example, whether it was the city, the Royal Botanical Gardens, the Conservation Authority, provincial park. And then they are put into the position where you have to consider, well, what would be the items of the recovery plan put forward, and how many of those items would affect your particular location. And so you have to go through a bunch of work to figure out, well, what would we have to do here if we were to tackle this? So turtles would happen to be the first one that we tackled, but we have a variety in process here. So we put in 5 years, a lot of hours, to say the least. Turtles are a tricky one, hiding underwater, but they were a good match with the Hamilton Harbour Remedial Action Plan. Being the real goal there is to recover fish and wildlife habitat, make it a place you'd go and visit, swim, fish, whatever. In the end, the plan that we put together was approved by the board of the Royal Botanical Gardens in March of this past year. Obviously, there'll be a fair number of items that we will work away on within the property, but turtles being a critter that spends most of their time at the Royal Botanical Gardens, but then moving off the property at nesting season, or even to migrate to another swamp somewhere else. That meant that other partner agencies were going to be drawn into it. So my project here today is to give you a little bit of a synopsis of how this would intersect with the city of Hamilton, particularly at the back of Coots Paradise. Here's a bit of a project map. This just gives you an overview of all the items that we sort of came up with. Of course, there's a big number 5 in the middle of the marsh there. Let's see if I can get an arrow. Where's my arrow? Oh, I saw him. He's fast. There. Number 5, that really just means anything related to the recovery of the water flowing into the marsh and thus the marsh itself. That encompasses a lot of items, and that sort of wraps into the remedial action plan. I'm not going to get into that one. I'm going to stick with the back of the marsh, this particular area, because this is where some city property exists, and this is, of course, where the big corridor is that then moves on to the Dundas Valley. You have the main river coming into the marsh back there, Spencer Creek, and so that tends to be the nexus point. Oh. So here's a little overview map. The marsh, if you look closely, you'll see a dark orange line rimming. It goes all the way around. It's a simple GIS map. Basically, that represents the transition between the lowlands and the uplands. So anything below in here, very wet, tends to be where turtles live. Anything above is where turtles will migrate to. Then there's this orange band, medium orange. That's the area where there's highly likely to be a turtle hiking off to nest. And of course, you can see there's a fair bit of territory within the town of Dundas that's, well, and they do have turtles appearing in their yards. There tends not to be turtles over here, so, but also true for the city of Burlington. So, also, something to understand is while turtles could live anywhere in here, their general migration is upriver and then upland. And of course, the idea is to reach dry land and sunshine by morning, where the eggs will then go into a dry, warm, sunny spot. That tends to mean migration this way, main river, Dundas Valley. So you can sort of get a sense of what we'd be looking at. So here's sort of some of the real troublesome spots. This captures a fair number of things. This is Olympic Drive that crosses right at the back. This is the connecting culvert under Olympic Drive. This is a bit of a challenge. There's a car going over it. You tend not to be able to travel through there. From the wetland habitat side, though, I highlighted this particular spot because upstream at the very head of the canal is the wastewater treatment plant. The wastewater treatment plant is currently going through some reviews for recommended upgrades, but the consequence of the wastewater treatment plant, it was took on its current form in basically 1985, is it puts out a little bit of extra fertilizer, you could say, a little extra nutrients. Tends to grow a little algae, and of course here's the canal locked up in a raft of algae. The wastewater treatment plant isn't the sole source there. In fact, the canal, which has had wastewater discharged into it for about a century, has a fair bit of accumulated material in the bottom, and so the canal tends to be a contributor in the heat of the summer, so there's a project to be had within the remedial action plan related to the canal. It's principally nutrients in the canal, but if you go back through the history, there's going to be some other items. And then, of course, this particular water spins off all sorts of introduced plants that cause us some trouble. So here we go. If I was to, again, highlight the marsh, the big star tends to be where most turtles concentrate. This happens to be westerly migration upland. And since they could have reached this location without crossing a road, they didn't get run over. So this tends to be where we have most of the turtles laying eggs still. They are still, of course, driven to go upland, and so you find them going back into all these areas. These are sort of areas where we've found them nesting. So our real pinch points, because they're traveling by water, there's the Olympic Drive culvert right there. Here's another underpass here. This is the main river, Spencer Creek, and the bridge there. Working with some volunteers who are, of course, quite concerned about critters getting run over on the roads. The turtles then seem to capture people's imagination more than the muskrat or the mink or the beaver or whatever. This is 3 years of incidents where turtles were either hit and killed, which is red, yellow, where a volunteer who was out there snagged it before it got on the road and got hit and took it across. Yes, so you can sort of get a sense of turtles moving from the marsh side upriver and where they're getting hit. I have this little area in blue here circled. What we did was we did a little test with a silt fence in this particular section because, of course, it was a doable section where the idea was, can we block them and force them, well, make them make a new choice, walk under the bridge, basically. That's the idea. So we have a blue circle there on the right. So the idea, can we stop them from hiking here and make them go under the bridge? And what we found in the last year and a half, I guess it's 2 seasons now, is one turtle got hit, and that was it. And we actually modified the length of the silt fence closer to the university. The university's down on the bottom right there. And that seemed to have turned it to 0. So what we learned is we can force them to go under the bridge, which is fantastic. Speaking of the Olympic Drive Weir, I have that a little out of sequence. This is what it is on the upstream side, the next picture. This is an old weir that was put there related to a project to try and manage how sewage was being treated in the canal in the 70s. It's never been pulled out. And of course, if you're a turtle who manages to find your way under the culvert, you then meet the weir, and so you're a little bit stuck. So we just like to see that one ripped out of there. The culvert itself is somewhat falling apart on both ends, and so perhaps there's a bigger project to be had on that crossing point. If I was to look downstream, the Olympic Drive Weir again is right here. Looking downstream, this is King Street right beside it on the left. Is that your left? Or that's your right? Sorry, that's your right. King Street is basically collapsing into the canal as well. So perhaps if we think a little more about this, there's a much bigger project to be had unless there's already works set in motion for King Street. Anyway, I then thought, well, of course, there's deer. There's another one. This is deer, another animal that's moving back and forth between there. This is just a side diversion related to wildlife corridors. So the deer, unlike the turtles, are big enough that if you hit them with your car, you have a bit of a problem. And so we have various accidents. What I have here is a map that indicates where deer have been killed over the past 3 years on the roads just around the Royal Botanical Gardens Cootes Paradise property. And where we got this information was already in existence. It was in the City of Hamilton's animal control information. So this is where they've had to go out and collect a carcass that was hit by a vehicle. And of course, if you think about that, that's actually a very small percentage, I'm sure, of the deer that have been hit out there. You start to get a sense of how many wildlife are moving back and forth between the natural areas out there, particularly Cootes Paradise, and over to the Dundas Valley and up into Flamborough. And you can see we have some challenges back in this area. Here happens to be the Spencer Creek Bridge, so we did manage to force turtles to go under here. A few deer do wander under here too. It's a bit tight. So, my final piece of information that I thought I'd give you relates to this particular big star, this nesting location where you can bring turtles across the back up onto the terrace and have them nest. So it turns out that what appeared while we were doing this study was, so this is a view looking the marsh in the background here, was a big fence around a community garden. This fence is actually on the Royal Botanical Gardens property and now serves as a barrier to keep the wildlife out of the community garden. That's what happens when you build a community garden next to a wildlife reserve. And so this community garden happens to sit right on the ridge where the turtles would like to nest. So we'd like to see the community garden shifted into this green space over here. So that's really the essence of the turtle plan in a quick sort of overview, and some of the summary points, some water quality related to the canal and the wastewater treatment plant. We kind of look at the turtles. The turtles on Cootes Drive are fairly straightforward, but you start to get into a much broader issue, and perhaps it's a suggestion of mine, considering the issue, that we should perhaps create a Natural Heritage Committee subgroup that looks at where the Natural Heritage Plan identifies areas bisected by roads and what sort of road kills are occurring there and collisions, and look at mitigating these. Another interesting one, Coots Drive, speed limit varies from 50 to 80 along there. We'd like to see the speed limit reduced to 60, which would allow drivers a little more time to see the wildlife that happens to pop out and perhaps slow down. Something that's come up quite often with the volunteers is the pattern of mowing along Coots Drive, and it's certainly caused the city staff some stress. So I thought I'd put forward the recommendation if we could get the mowing done before Turtle's Nest by mid-May, maybe it's even twice before mid-May, depending on the season, and then after they nest, which wraps up by mid-July, and then could mow away again for a while. That would keep the road looking fine. And future bridge work. Now I expect that the Spencer Creek Bridge will eventually be modified and enlarged because the largest river is Spencer Creek, and that is a rather tight bridge. So something to keep in mind is wildlife dimension to fitting under the bridge. Olympic Drive, same problem, old culvert. The real thing I suppose I'm after, though, is a fence along Coots Drive on the Coots Paradise side. The upstream side, the west side, that is undetermined on where and how much fence you'd actually attempt. There's a variety of issues there, and so at this time there's ongoing study looking into how and where. Also, something I didn't really get into, but we have a variety of introduced plants that we have to deal with that are corrupting the whole ecological situation. Phragmites, that's one of the giant reeds. We'd actually be happy ourselves at the Royal Botanical Gardens to include it in whatever Phragmites work we do and not have the city staff worry about it back there, mostly because it's Royal Botanical Gardens right up to the road, and then the Phragmites is really just creeping on the edge of the road rather than being the source of it. So if we could just take it out as we go along, that would be most welcome. And then, of course, finally, it'd be shift the community garden. That's the story.
Tice, thanks for the presentation. Any questions? Councillor McCaddy and Councillor Powers.
Thanks very much, Tice. Great presentation. Just a logistical point to begin with. I wonder if you could share those slides with us, maybe through clerks, especially some of the colored ones with the dots. We couldn't really see those very well.
Oh, sorry.
And we don't have those in front of us. And that seems like some critical information as to where the roadkills are happening versus where the nesting's happening and that kind of stuff. I think that would be helpful for us. I just supported through the Ward 1 area rating funding fencing dollars, which I shared with you. Can you point that out for us? Because you mentioned there was still a need for fencing.
Yes.
Along Coots Drive.
Where we worked that is in this particular section between Spencer Creek and McMaster University. So this is very high ground up here, and then this is a slow grade down to the wetland down here. So since we could actually, since we've done the background work, this is the amount of fence that seems to do the job. That's the spot that we've gone after to start with. The section that I'm referring to actually for future fencing actually runs basically the length of the road and turns right here. And then you would meet up with Hydro 1. And I've already met with Hydro 1 as well, and they're agreeable, and they've already done a fair bit of fence work, which of course, it also gets into, well, they don't need turtles in their lot while they're trying to do hydro work. It corrupts their whole operation, so they were happy to participate.
Okay. Just looking at what's occurred since the 1980s, I mean, population is thought to be half of what it was in the 1980s. I mean, that's catastrophic, I would think, within ecological processes. So is there a sense with all the stuff you've talked about, sort of the relative contributions of the different phenomena that are occurring? So we've got water quality issues, which are sort of a large issue that affects species at different times for different reasons and depending on what's going on. And is it mainly the lack of reproduction, for example? The turtles are getting hit before they reproduce, or the young are unsuccessful because they're getting hit, or something else is happening? And is there a good understanding of what the main driver is, or a relative contribution, so we could focus in on particular actions?
Indeed. Hands down, number one was originally the wetland habitat, right? It was extremely degraded. It is partway through recovery, so there's actually a fair bit of reasonable turtle territory out in the wetlands. So then your next one is migration and getting hit on your way to nesting. And so the roads, those two roads, Olympic Drive and Coots Drive, those tend to be the next, of course, because if you actually get very few turtles, even in the best of situations, recruiting into the turtle population, and a snapping turtle could live to be 100, and if it replaces itself 3 times, that's pretty good over 100 years. So if you lose it on its second hike up to nest, well, there you've just lost the next 80 years of potential. Number 3 would actually be the nesting grounds themselves, and we've been working away on trying to create nesting grounds next to the road to try and intercept them, but so far the turtles think, well, we're heading upland whether you like it or not. So maybe we'll convince a few, but and interestingly enough, it's actually sort of the nesting grounds, but it's actually the raccoons at the nesting grounds. So people will, this is a common problem that we have, occurs at any natural area where your annoying raccoon is really bugging you in the city, trap it, truck it out to the nearest natural area, let it go. Which means you have a lot of hungry raccoons concentrating.
Okay, thanks for that. So I have some more questions for staff, Mr. Chair, but thanks to Tice for his work on this, and lots more work to do. Thanks for outlining that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Russ Powers.
Thanks, Ty, for your presentation. You indicated over the last year and a half there's been a reduction. I think it's probably the efforts of the Turtle Watch people, but also certainly the introduction of the fencing. This year there was fencing introduced on the south side of Coots Drive and that along the Conservation Authority lands and that.
Correct.
Could you comment on that one?
Yeah, I would. The preliminary information I have, because they're working with the Conservation Authority more than ourselves, particularly on that one, that side, but almost no turtles were hit on the road this year. They're quite pleased about that, but yeah, so had the right effect.
So your suggestion of one of the recommendations was increased fencing, and that would include, that area along with the north section that you're saying from probably the on-ramp from McMaster University down to the turn on to Olympic Drive.
Yes, actually, so this is, just so we're all on the same page here, where the Conservation Authority put a fence in was along this side to mimic what we'd been doing on the other side to pilot whether. So they took it to about here, and certainly that shut down almost all roadkills in this section. The question, of course, is will the turtles keep moving up the fence? Where do you have to actually stop? What do you have to do? And so the current situation means we can't actually say take the fence to this spot. We could say it's got to come around that corner, but is it 500 feet? Is it 200 feet? Is it? Yeah, that's where we're stalled. And certainly we look forward to finalizing that sort of answer.
When at the point I'll receive the presentation, refer it to staff for their consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Powers. Is there any other? Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. You mentioned about raccoons, and I'm wondering, is there any interest in trying to reduce the raccoon population in the Westdale area? Because it is getting out of control. I have seen it personally in the residential neighborhoods, so I can imagine the effects it's having on the turtle population.
How would I say this? We're a big fan of things in balance, and there's a few extra of certain species, and we do find that a lot of that is a result of people exporting raccoons from somewhere else into the, doesn't matter if it's the Dundas Valley or Coots Paradise, those would be 1 and 1A for drop-offs. We've been working with the Ministry of Natural Resources, who regulates this sort of thing to a certain degree, and they have specifically spoken to a variety of pest control companies who have been undertaking this activity. The volunteers are great eyes on indicating which company shows up, so yes.
But you're right, the dilemma is even pest control, if they catch them, they have to take them so far within the area and re-release them. So that doesn't help in this particular instance, correct?
That does not help in this instance, yes.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, I need a motion to receive. Moved by Councillor Powers, second by Councillor Basuda. All those in favor? Thank you very much for the presentation. Now, I do have my Councillor McCaddy, who indicated he had some questions for staff.
Mr. Chair, I think Councillor Powers is just going to refer the whole report to staff to follow up with Tice. I mean, certainly establishing the Wildlife Corridors Committee seems to be something that staff can do. They don't necessarily need us to ask them to do that. So hopefully that'll be direction or information coming out of Tice's presentation. So lots of questions there, but I think probably in the interest of time, maybe referring the report to staff or report back sometime in the new term of council would be the appropriate direction.
Thank you, Councillor McCaddy. Councillor Powers. So moved by Councillor Powers, second by Councillor McCaddy, that we've already received the report, but request staff to come back with a report on this issue. Is that correct? Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. We now have a delegation from Matthew Devona respecting the Hopkins Dog Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, committee. My name is Matthew Devona. I'm from Davies Howe Partners, LLP. We are counsel to a Miss Shirley Hawkins. She's the property owner at 2 Valley Road. This is the property immediately adjacent to the dog park in question. She's actually the only residential property adjacent to this dog park.
Wait, just before you finish, I just want to note that Councillor Powers did declare a conflict and has removed himself from the council chambers. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. So our client, Ms. Shirley Hawkins, is the landowner immediately adjacent to the dog park. So for the obvious reasons, she is on the front line and is the first person to receive any impacts or negative effects from what we would characterize as a noxious use in terms of noise and or intrusion into her lands. So as by way of background, Ms. Hawkins and her family have owned this property for over 50 years. So she has a history here in the community and she has no intention of moving. So firstly, and I'll keep this very short, and I appreciate what this committee's mandate is, but her concerns are twofold. Firstly, she has serious issues with the validity of the bylaw that was enacted to establish this dog park, both for procedural and substantive improprieties. Now, I won't get into the details of that concern, and first to maintain an amicable tone here, and also to be cognizant of the fact that we're trying to work with this committee, and why we're here is to put a request before you so that we can deal with the land use and impact issues. So that goes into our second area of concern. It's with the impacts that this dog park has had to her property. And firstly, the impacts are related to noise and also to intrusion into her property. You could appreciate having animals, and not just human users, but it's more so the animal users sharing this property line with you. Almost the first place these animals go when they get to the property is they go and they search the perimeter. So you're constantly bombarded by these animals looking into your home, looking along the property line, and marking their territory. So we can summarize our concerns about impacts, and they have been summarized actually before staff. We wrote on July 21st, and we put our issues to staff, and we proposed 3 specific areas that we thought could help remedy the issues of impact. So the first solution we proposed was to limit the hours of operation. As it currently stands, the park operates between 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. And for a number of reasons, this is a very big problem for our client. And also, I can tell you that it's an irregularity because it's even inconsistent with, in our opinion, with the city's noise bylaws and animal bylaws. So it raises a number of concerns. And I realize this isn't the first dog park in the city. So I'm sure you're wondering, well, these issues can't be unique to Ms. Hawkins, but in a real way they are, because this is the first leash-free dog park of any kind actually, that's been created right beside a residential property. So this site is going to raise certain concerns that you haven't heard before. And that's just because of the nature of the use right beside a residential receptor. So that's a big problem. That's probably the root of the problem here. We have a residential receptor immediately adjacent to this use. Never before been done in the city of Hamilton. So the other area of concern is the property line, obviously, sharing this property line. So we mentioned to staff that it could be helpful to move that fence boundary some feet south away from the residential property our client occupies. So we propose that they move the property line 50 feet. And in conjunction with that, and this goes into our last area, we propose that there be plantings, multiple rows of conifers and evergreens to help add a visual and acoustical barrier. So we think the three of these mitigation measures, we'll call them, would address all of our clients' concerns. And putting aside the issue about the validity of the enactment, we're not here to argue that the bylaw should have never been passed, this park should not be there. That's not what this delegation is about. And I know you'll hear from another delegate that's going to be speaking to the idea that this park is a good place and it should continue to be there. We're not making any comment on that. All we're saying is these are the three areas of concern that we think this committee can properly address by way of motion or in our directions to staff, that we think it will solve the negative impacts that have been created on the property. So unless there are any other questions, that's my presentation.
Thank you for the presentation. I just caution my colleagues that there is a potential litigation on this issue, so I would limit the questions primarily to the mitigating part of his presentation and not get into the other procedural issue. That way we won't be crossing the line or compromising anyone at this particular meeting. So any questions of the delegation? Seeing none, at this point I would suggest then that we take that delegation forward to staff and ask staff to come back with a report relative to this presentation. Move to receive the delegation. Moved by Councillor Collins, second by Councillor Ferguson. All those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. So on the report, which is item number, Madam Clerk? 8.3. 3. Yes, 8.3. What was suggested, I did meet with our solicitor, and the advice I received was that we take the delegation information and we forward it back to staff to bring a report forward. We just received this delegation, so obviously that's perhaps new information that the staff need to respond to. Councillor Jackson.
So, Mr. Chairman, then a point of order. Would you like then us to refer 8.3 back then with this added information?
Correct.
Would staff be affirmative with that then, Mr. Chairman, through you to the appropriate staff? Director Murdoch, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we can report back as directed.
If you'd like to get that off the agenda now, Mr. Chairman, I could move 8.3 back with this added information.
Thank you. So moved by Councillor Jackson, second by Councillor Ferguson, that we move back the report and have it come back reflecting and responding to the representations that are made here today. All those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So 8.2 is being disposed. Sorry, 8.3. Now we have a delegation from Carl Fraser respecting the dog park on York Road, Dundas. We should probably wait for that delegation, but come on down anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm probably one of the few people here not getting paid today. But I'm Carl Fraser, and I'm a resident of Dundas, and I've been here since 1987. In 1987, but in 2007 I was Citizen of the Year in Dundas for the Dundas Rotary Skating Rink project. But I'm here today as a dog owner who uses the park, and I've been up there every night for the last week just to see what goes on. Usually I just go on Sunday afternoons with my dog, But in that period of time, I sort of looked, and I think the city has planted some trees adjacent to the property, but that's not up to me, it's up to the city. The noise on York Road from traffic is probably more than the noise of the dogs barking. Dogs do bark, but not a lot, because usually they're running, chasing balls and things like that. But in a 1 week time frame, just going up in the evening, and on Saturday and Sunday, I collected 271 signatures of people in Dundas or Hamilton or Waterdown that are using the park. And they're using that park versus going to a football field, going to a soccer field that they're not supposed to be going to. And that's why people are using dog leash-free parks, and that's why the city puts them in. So I'm just here just saying, we like the park, we respect the neighbor, and we try not to go up and gawk in her property. I don't think a lot of people do, but I think when the staff come back, her property is a long ways away, her house is a long ways away from that, but very few people walk along the fence line, which is now protected by new trees. But I just want to say that I know that nobody wants anything next to their house, sometimes not even your neighbor, but it's all I'm saying is we have 271 people that use the park, like the park, we respect other people's opinion, and we want a place to take our dogs, and I'm sure, you know, down the road there'll probably be 1,000 people. But that's what it is for everything. But I just want to make a point that it's important to voice your opinion, and that's why I'm coming to speak to the committee. And we are taxpayers, we're respectful citizens of the city of Hamilton, even though you're merged with Dundas. But we're respectful of what goes on and what staff do, and we just want to say that I'm sure you'll end up making the right decisions, but we just want to be heard. So if anybody wants to see the 271 names, I'll leave them here and table them. And
you just give them to the clerk. Thank you. Noted that that we received the I guess it's a petition, right?
Yes.
Questions, Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, Mr. Fraser, I want to apologize that when I moved the motion to refer the overall report back in light of the neighbors' concerns, I didn't want to usurp your presentation, your delegation here today, which I very much appreciate. So I just want to say that for the record. I apologize. I didn't realize you were speaking to the one and same item. Mr. Fraser, as somebody who probably had the first official dog park about 14 years ago up in my area on Dartnell Road by the SPCA and the Animal Control Shelter, a couple of acres there. Just wondered in terms of the users of the park and as a pet owner, I found at first there was going to be a volunteer committee, Mr. Chairman, that was set up to kind of oversee, put a little peer pressure to ensure people looked after the park properly and that there was no difficulties with its maintenance or as a good neighbor. Is there that kind of a informal group in place, first of all? Or secondly, have the 271 and others, if you will, been overall respectful in terms of each other and the neighbor? Mr. Chairman, through you to Carl, please, for a comment.
Okay. I've been to just about every park in the city of Hamilton with the dog, and the one in Dundas is probably the best. One, there's reasonable parking. There's a few things that the Conservation Authority can do in regard to get better signage for people that are going to Boers Falls and other places on walking trails that people come and ask. But versus Ancaster, which has a lot of dogs, like normally there's 5 to 20 dogs there a day. There's picnic tables, there's trees, people sit underneath the picnic tables. It's sort of like a community gathering without being at Tim Hortons is what it really is. And I haven't seen any vicious dogs or anybody acting in an irresponsible manner. When somebody comes in, they don't ask the person's name, they ask the dog's name. But then if a dog's going to the bathroom, they say, who's that person, who owns that dog, and clean it up. And it's a well-used park. I know that most of the times you'll see a whole bunch of people, like 20, 25 people. When I was there last Saturday, there was a lady came with her dog, And I said, would you mind signing this petition? And I said, where are you from? She said, I'm from Peterborough. And I said, what are you doing from Peterborough here? She said, well, my mom just passed away from the villa. Her dad lives on Hamilton Mountain. And she said, after a 2-hour drive, I wanted to let my dog out and go for a run. So she stopped in the park. She came in, was there for 10 or 15 minutes. Dog had the run. And then she went on her way. And she said, this is, even better than the one they have in Peterborough. So that's nice to know that that happens. Oh, sorry.
So,
Sorry about that.
not at all, Mr. Fraser. So it sounds like that there's a nice, respectful, responsible, peer-type pressure and oversight from all the users. I'm a big fan of these dog parks. Again, have the one up on Dartnell Road, and let's hope with the report that comes back, taking in the one main neighbor's concerns, Mr. Chairman, that we can hopefully get to a nice compromise. Thanks, Carl. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Councillor Miller to take the chair. I think what's noted here, though, is most of our dog parks are separate and apart and not adjacent to residential properties. As good as the owners are, and I'm a dog owner, I know that my dog will mark every spot. The first place they go is like to the fence posts, the property lines and so forth, and try and prevent that from happening. So I guess the question is, what we heard here today in regards to the delegation and the presentation was more about looking ways to mitigate that kind of response. You've mentioned the trees have been planted. You have no objections to those mitigating circumstances to enhance the residential property owners adjacent to the park.
No, and I think just one point of interest is that when you come in the park, you come in at the low end of the property. Property slopes up like that, up towards Valley Road. And as York Road goes up the hill, the property owners at the very top end of the property. So most dog owners only go halfway up the property or 3/4 of the way up the property. So the idea of moving the fence, it wouldn't bother, I'm sure, the dog owners. I'm just speaking for myself, that to move the fence down a bit. But there's very few people that go up and walk along the fence's edge. Very, very few. There's lots of other trees and shrubs in around there. And I'm sure that if some of the dogs went up there, then they may get ticks or things like that. So most people stay down in the middle area of the park, and it's well fenced in because it goes right around the pumping station.
So what I'm hearing, though, is you have no issues with what was being suggested by the previous delegation relative to making it more ideal for the adjacent residential homeowners. Is that correct?
That's correct. As like with the time of operation, moving the fence, personally, they wouldn't be a big issue as long as they didn't close the park. If they closed the park, then we'd have a big issue. And the noise, there's more noise going up York Road, and I'm sure the traffic study would show that, but there's more people living in Dundas now, and they have to get out on the highway someplace, and that's the way they go.
Yeah. So what we actually did, probably somewhat prematurely before your presentation, I apologize for that, is that a motion was moved just to receive what was being talked about by the previous delegation and forwarding that information for consideration by our staff to bring that report back. So I don't think I heard anyone talking about closing the park in any way, but just further enhancing it to make sure there's a balance for the dog owners as well as the homeowners. So certainly complementary and synergistic and no conflict. So I really appreciate you coming forward. I'll take the chair back. Any further questions? Seeing none, I need a motion to receive. Moved by Councillor Jackson, second by Councillor Basuda. All those in favor? Carry. Thank you very much for your presentation. Okay, so we've already dealt with 8.3, so now we're down. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, so on my motion that referred back, I believe, Laurie, we have one more Public Works meeting this month. Mr. Chairman, is it possible, Craig, to bring that report back in 2 weeks? Because I think there's obviously lots of dog owners out there that want this to go ahead, Mr. Chairman. It was my motion to refer it back in light of the first delegation's concerns. So, and I'd like to hopefully get something done before this term of council's over. Mr. Chairman, through to Craig, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we'll do our best. Because we have to confer with legal services and some of the consequences of, or the expenses of going through this, so we'll have to identify funding sources.
Craig, I appreciate best efforts, Craig. Mr. Chairman, my only worry is that if we've got that many dog owners out there, and then this potentially with the new council, whoever's here coming in, potentially 3-4 months in a state of limbo before January, I worry about that. So I ask you for best efforts for 2 weeks from now, please.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Chair, like I said, we'll do our best, but I'm sure we can accomplish that.
Okay. Thank you, Craig.
Well,
thanks, Mr. Chairman.
And as a chair, I'll work with staff, and if there's any impediments, I will hopefully be notified and see if we can overcome those impediments to ensure that it's here in a timely fashion. We already dealt with 6.4, so we're down to presentations. 7.1, we now have a presentation regarding an overview of stormwater infrastructure. I call on Darrell Smith to come forward to make the presentation.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of committee. I am pleased to be here today to provide you an overview of the Operations Division Stormwater Management Program, concentrating on maintenance and rehabilitation. The intent of this presentation is to provide the committee with an overview of the maintenance services in the stormwater management infrastructure components within the city's inventory. So this overview builds on program and financial information that was provided in the 2014 budget, and generally will address, as you see here, stormwater system, the makeup, the responsibilities, mission, inventory, core activities and budget, improvement initiatives, and challenges and opportunities going forward. So what makes up the stormwater system? So as you can see here, there are many components, starting at the lot level, things such as rain barrels, cisterns, downspouts, moving on to the conveyance system, which are catch basins and inlets, channels, ditches, sewers, roadways, and of course we get into the control function, stormwater management ponds, storage tanks, inline storage, and pumping stations. And what does operations involved in? As you can see here highlighted in red, catch basins, inlets, channels, ditches, roadways, stormwater management ponds, and pumping stations, specifically being the Beach Street pumping station, which was constructed last year. So we are going to not discuss roadways this morning, except for the fact that roadways are part of the stormwater system. A lot of people don't realize that the way that the stormwater system is designed, roadways are designed to flood in major storms, and they are used to convey water in major storms. That is not universally known, so I just wanted to raise that point this morning before talking about the rest of the infrastructure. So what is our mission? The mission of the Operations Division is to ensure the optimal function of the municipal stormwater infrastructure, to minimize risks of flooding through planned inspection, maintenance, and capital rehabilitation programs, effectively and efficiently servicing over 1,700 kilometers of roadside ditches, 169 stormwater management ponds, and over 42,000 catch basins and leads. There are, of course, water courses, culverts, and outlet and inlet structures included in that, but we don't have inventory numbers at this point. So what are the core activities and the budget? As you can see here, the 2014 approved budget was a little over $7.7 million. Approximately half comes from capital funding and half comes from operating. The core activities include safety, obviously. We have an extensive preventive maintenance programs that includes regularly checking flooding hotspots prior to heavy rainfall events and removing any vegetation and or obstacles and doing repairs as required. So just to clarify where we fit in and how we tie into asset management, if a structure or bridge or culvert is under 3 meters span, then operations is responsible for the entire culvert, including replacement or reconstruction, rehabilitation, and maintenance. If it is over 3 meters in span, then asset management is responsible for the replacement, but rehabilitation and maintenance functions still fall under the operations division. So obviously we work hand in hand with asset management when we look at our structures to develop the inventory and to develop a condition assessment. The final core function of our stormwater program is the drainage superintendent program, and Wayne Song is the city's drainage superintendent. He administers the municipal drain program, and some of you are familiar with that because you'll have that in your ward. And there's also some cost recovery under the municipal drain program. And he also provides support and advice through his expertise. So what are some of the initiatives that we've done since 2010 during the term of this committee? Prior to 2010, the stormwater program was almost completely reactive. Something would happen, and we'd go out and fix it. Since that time, we've been working to become proactive in our approach and not just responding to emergencies and infrastructure failures, but transitioning and planning works to avoid those failures going forward. To make this transition, we have completed an asset inventory of catch basins, ponds, some which are assumed, unassumed, and private, public channels and water courses, and we are currently finalizing the culvert inventory, and we expect that to be completed by the end of 2014. And of course, we'll be reporting back to committee on any program recommendation that comes out of that. We have a project manager, as I said before, Wayne Song, who's also the drainage superintendent, who is responsible for administering the stormwater program. On the average for the last 4 years, the city has rehabilitated 5 ponds per year. When we rehabilitate a pond, we mostly remove silt built up that has reduced the storage volume over time and of course then reduces the effectiveness of the pond. And we also do any major repairs that are required to the inlet or the outlet structures. Although this is an excellent start, there is a significant backlog of stormwater management ponds that require rehabilitation work to return them to the functionality that was originally planned. We have established a permanent stormwater crew out of the Roads Division. This crew This crew does inspections on all stormwater ponds within the city, does minor repair works, and also cleans debris and any litter that may be clogging the outlet or taking up volume in the pond. The Beach Street pumping station was constructed. This area, which has been subject to chronic flooding over the years, used to be serviced by portable pumps. It would take time to go down there, set up, time to get the pumps running, and to address the flooding problem. With the permanent pumping station completed, staff time now to respond to an emergency there is much quicker. We can go down and get that pumping station working. The catch basin cleaning program has been established, and council has provided funding which allows all catch basins within the city to be cleaned on a 2-year cycle. And all our flooding hotspot catch basins are cleaned every year. As I mentioned before, we have a proactive storm response now. So if we have a forecasted heavy rainfall event, crews visit every flooding hotspot stormwater pond, major channel within the city to address and clear issues before the event happens. And finally, with staff dedicated to the management of the stormwater facilities, the city now can confirm that we are in compliance with the Ministry of Environment Certificate of Approvals. So we do have some challenges going forward. The first challenge is inventory growth. At present, the city averages 3 new ponds a year and an increase of catch basins of about 4%, which is over 1,500 catch basins per year from new developments that have been assumed by the city. Both of these trends are likely to continue based on the planned growth within the City of Hamilton now. That puts an additional strain on the existing resources, whether it be internal labor, fleet, or contracted services, and budget, obviously, to maintain the current service levels. So the life cycle. Based on our current funding levels, if the backlog was cleared up, as I mentioned before, there is a backlog of ponds, a stormwater pond must last about 14 years prior to a major rehabilitation. Now, that may be a reasonable expectation in a fully developed sub-watershed area. No development going on upstream. It's all mature. It's all built out. That's probably not a bad life cycle for a stormwater management pond. However, in a sub-watershed where there is development upstream, we have found that a storm pond can have a life as little as 3 years before it requires a major rehabilitation. So we are working closely with our planning and development staff to try to address this as best we can. First, planning and development are requiring stringent siltation control at all runoff points within developments. We know that that doesn't capture everything, but it does do a great job at helping the downstream ponds maintain some life. Secondly, so prior to the assumption of a storm pond within a new subdivision, operations staff and planning and development staff go out together, and we develop a list of deficiencies within the pond and require the developer to complete the works before we assume the pond. So that means any silt built up has to be removed, any litter has to be removed. And what that does, it ensures that the facility is working at its optimum capacity when the city takes it over. That will give us the longest life possible out of that pond. But despite all our best management practices, there will continue to be a budget pressure in the future to address the inventory growth and life cycle rehabilitation. This next thing is the cross-culvert replacement program. It's an integral part of our stormwater system. The minor cross-culvert rehabilitation and replacement program, however, needs to be enhanced. Although staff is trying to plan a proactive approach to this, the current backlog of culverts that are in critical condition requires that our funding for this activity is used to replace or repair them on a purely reactive basis. Watercourse management is a big challenge. It's one of the most significant challenges we face, and the reason why is 80% of the channels within the City of Hamilton are privately owned. As such, we do not have the authority or the mandate to go in there and do any works. We can't go in and clean out any debris. We can't take fallen trees out of the channel. We have initiated discussions with the Conservation Authority, however, because staff at the city believe that this is under the Conservation Authority's mandate. And at this time, we haven't reached a resolution of these discussions, but we will keep committee informed as these discussions proceed. Climate change. It's somewhat of a big picture item, so I'm only going to talk to it from the perspective of what does it mean at the maintenance and operations level. What Environment Canada is telling us now is that we are going to experience higher intensity storms over small areas. They're called microbursts. And micro doesn't refer to the amount of rain that comes out of them. Micro refers to the amount of land area that they cover. These microbursts, though covering a small area, like the storm that hit Burlington just a few weeks ago, do have high-intensity rainfall that exceed the capacity of the infrastructure to manage. So I don't want to get into stormwater design too much, but I got to raise a point here just to finish this off. I'm sure most of you have heard of the 100-year storm or the 10-year storm or the whatever storm. Thank you. Well, it is a statistic, and we all know what they say about statistics, but in theory, we are supposed to experience a 100-year storm once every 100 years. I do know from personal experience when I was in Flamborough in the mid-90s that in a 72-hour period, there was 200-year storms and a 50-year storm, so I don't believe it either. The fairly recent history of these microstorms show that they have a greater intensity than the 100-year storm. And you have to understand, except for Hurricane Hazel, which is a regional storm event, the 100-year storm is what we design the maximum of our stormwater systems to carry. And these microbursts, though they cover maybe just a subwatershed and not the whole city, are dumping enough rain to exceed that 100-year storm design. So what does that mean to us, bottom line? It means that during these severe microburst storms that exceed the 100-year storm event, we can have every piece of equipment, every stormwater management pond, every pipe, every catch basin working to its peak capacity, and we will still experience flooding, and there's not a thing we can do about it, unfortunately. What are some of the other environmental issues that we have? Some of the challenges include our 2007 Stormwater Master Plan, which calls for the conversion of dry ponds to wet ponds. It's not that this is the plan itself is a good plan that we follow and we do. However, there is an increased cost to convert a dry pond to a wet pond. So I just want the committee to be aware of that. Our wet ponds are becoming habitat for nature, which is a good thing. We just had the presentation from the RBG with respect to habitat. Well, our wet ponds are becoming habitat. Recently, it was discovered that one of our ponds has become habitat for the milk snake, which is a species at risk in Canada. This, however, now limits us to what we can do and when we can do it when we go to rehabilitate that pond. And finally, in the challenges section, there's been some discussion from the MOE that they are going to require water quality sampling at the outlet structures of stormwater management ponds. It's only at the discussion stage. It's more of a, I would say, more of a hard rumor than a fact right at the moment. But staff have a concern that if they are going to require quality testing, that they may require rehabilitation or remediation if the testing don't meet specific guidelines going forward. So what are some of the opportunities? Program service levels. So we want to, in the upcoming months, develop service levels for the maintenance of stormwater facilities based on their design, based on their life cycle. And once those service levels are approved, they will help stabilize budget demands and expectations going forward. Program performance. Developing performance measures to allow staff to address ongoing maintenance issues. We anticipate that we will be working closely with asset management and water wastewater in this area. The long-term goal is to make the capital rehabilitation program proactive while tying into programs that water, wastewater, and asset management already have under construct or already have in the works. Continuous improvement culture. As a staff, we are going to be looking for ways to always improve our best management practices, always find ways to do things better, and not only in this area, but throughout our whole operation. Optimize staff performance. The key delivering any of these services is our staff. And management is going to be working closely with our staff to optimize that performance. This obviously will include managing absences through our ASMP program, our health and safety, addressing any health and safety issues, developing employees so that they are better able to meet the challenges that come forward through changing that we've talked about in the challenges. And finally, we are planning to reallocate existing resources to form a second stormwater management crew, of road staff, to deal with the inventory growth. And then finally, we will continue to collaborate with planning and development, water, wastewater, to ensure that stormwater systems and related maintenance programs will be able to meet the current and anticipated demand. So thank you for having me here today. I would also like to thank the members of the Operation Management Extended Management team who helped, being Jennifer Atkinson, Wayne Song, Derek Sohill, and Bob Paul. And now I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that committee may have.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Could you, Daryl, just put back up slide 6, please? One more.
Sorry. It's going to go this way.
Okay,
there we go.
That's good. So, first of all, and to Acting Director Aldor and Acting GM Gary Moore, this slide is incredibly important, I believe, for our citizens, for our taxpayers. I would hope that through corporate communications, Mr. Chairman, Mike Kirkopoulos, that we can get this kind of slide and messaging out in terms of City Council working with the departments, with our community, for all of the improvements. We only have to see recently what happened so sadly to our neighbors in Burlington. All we need to be reminded of is what happened here in July of 2009, one of the huge, massive floods of 7,000 homes affected in our city, to know that this kind of proactive measures with council's additional support through the budget, working with staff, is incredibly important. So thank you, Daryl, for that slide. Now, Daryl, I want to say that you both raised my hopes as well as you kind of discouraged me at the same time. And I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but anyway, so be it. So Council, Mr. Chairman, has, my question to Daryl, Council has, since 2009, we have approved backwater, and this is between Director McKinnon, Director Moore, and Acting Director Dorr. We've approved backwater valves. We've approved $1,000 deductibles on insurance for flood victims. We've asked our finance staff to ensure with the insurance companies to stop victimizing our citizens simply based on postal codes because they're supposedly in a risk area. I need to ensure, Daryl, that between you, Hamilton Water, Director of Engineering Services, that there's this kind of collaboration going on, whether it's sewer relining, whether it's the water pond management, whether it's maintenance of the catch basins. We gave you extra money this year, Daryl. I know not entirely what you needed, but we gave you some for the 43,000 catch basins across the city to do the 2-year cycle. I think the citizens need to hear this collaboration between these 3 main divisions, ops, operations, water, and engineering, to ensure we're doing the best we possibly can to hopefully prevent any future damage. Mr. Chairman, through to Daryl for a comment, please.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I can say without a doubt that that is happening and occurring. I know that we at a staff level, so the project manager level, are meeting and discussing almost daily issues that come forward to find the best way to deal with them. And even though, we are going to face challenges going forward, we are doing things that protect our citizens, such as the backwater prevention valves. That will address basement flooding in those homes. Those things will bear fruit. And when I talked about the flooding issues, I should have made it clearer that I'm talking about, hopefully for the most part, major overland flow. The backwater prevention is going to help and assist with any of the sewer issues that may come from having a sewer pipe surcharged because of a rainfall event. I don't know if Dan wants to add anything to that.
Dan or Al or Gary, or has Daryl kind of captured it? Mr. Chairman, through you to Dan further.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think Daryl's and slide 2 really highlights the fact that stormwater management in any municipality is extremely complex, and it covers a lot of different operating groups. And you know, it's rare that I'll compliment Gary, but I think that he deserves it for the asset management group that we have here. And the asset management work that Hamilton does, they're recognized for it. And I think the relationships between the operating groups and the asset management group are extraordinary here in Hamilton.
Thanks, Dan. You guys can work that out after office hours today. I'm sure you will. So, Mr. Chairman, just to wrap up, you know, when things are going well, our constituents enjoy the parks, the rec centers, the libraries, the playgrounds. When, God forbid, a catastrophe happens, that's when engineering, roads ops, and Hamilton Water have to come together and continue to collaborate to do our best to prevent, avoid, and protect our citizens. So whoever's here on the next term of council, this has to be top of mind. Thank you very much, Daryl. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Councillor Marilla to take the chair, and I just have a couple of questions, and I have Councillor McCaddy. I guess what concerns me somewhat, you talked about 3-year ponds coming in. And I'm not sure if that we're mandated to take every pond. So I'm going to give you an example. St. Elizabeth Village has a number of ponds that they've been apparently maintaining themselves for the last number of years. I've been told that the city's going to be taking over those ponds. So are we willingly taking on costs now? Can I help understand what that process is?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of the fact that we are taking on those ponds, but I can actually look into that and get back to you. I don't have the facts in front of me.
Okay, well, I can confirm that there's already paperwork, and the city is now will be taking on the maintenance and that of those ponds that we haven't maintained for a number of years. And again, we're taking additional costs and putting them back on all property taxpayers. I'm just wondering what that strategy is, because there must be private ponds as well as citywide type ponds. And have we distinguished in our inventory how many are city and how many are maintained within the private sector?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, we have. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I can supply you with those numbers. So we do have the broken down by assumed ponds, which are ours, unassumed ponds, which are coming to us, and private ponds that are the responsibility of the private landowner to maintain.
Okay, appreciate that. No one can understand better from the experiences of residents, and certainly across the city, but in my case, Ward 8, when we talk about you do everything you can in regards to building the infrastructure on the 100-year storm model, but with the type of intensity in the storms that we receive, the infrastructure is prepared to take on that onslaught. But the thing I've learned through this exercise is, yeah, there's certain limitations in regards to your storm management system and capacity, but the fallback always is and always will be the overland flow. And I guess the question I have on the overland flow is, have we done our due diligence? Because I know we certainly found a lot of imperfections in the overland flow in Ward 8. Have we done a comprehensive review on our overland flows, never mind the balance of those systems, to ensure that, because ultimately if you don't have that working and you have those major falls, then it's just going to exacerbate the issue within those neighborhoods. So the question is, have we done comprehensively across the city to ensure the fallback, the overland flow system, is optimized and there isn't any shortfalls?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I can speak to water courses, and maybe there's some help coming up with respect to overland flow in general. So as I spoke to through my presentation, we do have a serious challenge there, because 80% of the water courses, which are a significant portion of the overland flow routes, do not belong to the city. They're under private ownership, and we do not have the authority to enter or maintain those. And it's not too hard to see examples of where the city infrastructure is working fine and you have a private water course that's been altered, or they've built something into the water course and it's causing flooding upstream of that, which is why staff have entered into discussions with respect to the Conservation Authority, and we believe that it is their mandate to deal with that issue. With respect to overland flow on the roadways, again, the road operations staff do deal with that, and they look to deal with any issues that come out of that and deal with any blockages that come through that. Obviously, we take that very seriously. It's part of our program. We do this every year. We go around and we look at the areas. We know that there's some, in Ward 8, that there's some serious issues there that, have been chronic over time, and that we're dealing with them. So we are doing best management practices for what we can control and trying to engage partners in what we can't control.
And I appreciate that. I just wanted to focus on it. I, for one, know that it would be be a huge cost burden, and there's no way that we could address every eventuality. But what we can do is make sure that the fundamental, rudimentary way of dealing with water is the overland flow system. That's our roadways I'm specifically talking about, that we're ensuring that those plans and the way they're laid out are working. They were not working in Ward 8. So my question is, we're not working in Ward 8, then what other areas of the city, our road networks are designed in such a way that didn't anticipate the type of storms we're receiving, and it's not doing the job in regards to moving that water along. And I would hope at least those studies are underway or completed, and that's where I was focusing on. The last question is quality control. The biggest bug in my bonnet is, whether it's roads or ponds, is our acumen in regards to our staff overseeing the quality control and construction. We got roadways that were built that are supposed to last 25 years, and after 3 years, they look like they're 25 years old. So when you're talking about ponds, it concerns me when you're saying the life cycle of a pond in some of these areas where there's further development upstream is only 3 years. It really concerns me in regards to design. Is that a design issue, or is that a maintenance issue?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that is not a design issue. It is a sediment control issue. So we have been working with staff from planning and development, because they are the overseers of the program before it comes to us, to ensure that the sediment and control is put in, that it's inspected regularly, that any deficiencies are dealt with. And we have seen a vast improvement in this area with the help of planning and development, to ensure that the developers are doing and maintaining. It will only do so much, but it will help us deal with the sediment downstream to an extent. So the worst case scenario, the 3 years that I was talking about, that has happened over the past, not in the past couple of years. That was an older example. So I know that we have already seen the benefit of the more stringent siltation control plan that planning and development is put in place.
Okay, I appreciate that, because to me, if the life cycle of roads is 25 years, it takes the water, it takes the pounding, it takes everything else, and our water pond is 3 years, there's something wrong. And that scares the blue Jesus out of me in regards to the cost to the taxpayers of this community. So I would hope that quality control and all the mitigating criteria that we can put forward to ensure that we're getting an optimizing life cycle of those ponds is paramount. So those are my questions and comments. I'll take the chair back and recognize.
Chairman, you have Councillor Powers on the list to speak.
Thank you. Councillor McCaddy.
So thank you very much for the report. I think
Sorry. I got Councillor McCaddy, then Councillor Powers.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Gerald, for the presentation. Incredibly important stuff, and the climate change section is really sobering to think about what we're up against. Just thinking about that, though, part of that challenge is infiltration. We've got a lot of asphalt, a lot of hard surfaces throughout the city. And is there any dedicated program, and I've heard little bits of it, but I haven't heard any formal program sort of advertised clearly, where we're actually purposely trying to increase the amount of pervious surface throughout the city. You know, at the same time, we're getting development, of course, which is going in the other direction. Also, there's stormwater management as a result of development. So I'm thinking the rain ponds, which I've heard a little bit about, permeable driveways, a way to actually mandate that, because unless we do that, we're really in some trouble from what you're saying, Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's not really something that's in the maintenance program, and I'm not sure there's someone here that may be able to speak to it better than I.
That's okay. I think you're quite right. It's in a different category. I just thought about it with the catastrophe that you brought to us with your description of climate change. And I was going to ask about, I have another question, which I think probably Dan can answer. Just the storage in the stormwater pipes that we have throughout the city, or the CSO pipes throughout the city. Mr. Chair, we had that program that we were working on, where we've got a storm in one part of the city, the rest of the city is virtually dry, and we've got a lot of pipes that we can actually store stormwater in addition to the CSO retention tanks. So just an update maybe on that project, which was quite exciting, but I haven't heard much about it recently. Through you to Dan.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think Councillor's talking about the real-time control project. And we have constructed, I believe, 3 different facilities down on the north end. The primary goal of that project was to reduce spills into the harbor by using the capacity that's in the existing system. One of the further benefits that we're hoping to get out of that is to help with flooding, basement flooding and that kind of thing. We have a phase 2 of that project. One of the things we wanted to ensure was that when we built these first 3 facilities, we had an opportunity to work with them for a few years to understand the benefits and to kind of work out the wrinkles. With the Woodward upgrade project, part of the money as part of that project, I believe it's $10 million, will be for phase 2 of the real-time control project, and that's where we'll hopefully get into upgrades further up in the upper reaches of the combined sewer system to see whether or not there are opportunities to reduce flooding.
Thanks for that, Dan. That provides, I think, a huge opportunity, especially given the microbursts focus on one part of the city. The whole pipes right across the whole rest of the city are virtually empty other than day-to-day storage. So that's a huge opportunity. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. Councillor Powers.
Joe, thanks for your presentation. Most recently, I was at the Premier's Conference on Infrastructure, and one of the things we talked about, one of the things we referenced, and perhaps it's either you or Dan to speak on it, is obviously the impact of climate change and the realities of climate change and the ability to accommodate. It takes a lot of money and a lot of time in order to design the systems. But certainly something for the new council, the new public works, would be the pilot project between the Insurance Bureau of Canada and the City of Hamilton. There's 3 municipalities that are part of this pilot project with regards to risk management and alleviation. So I think that would probably be a good supplemental presentation to a public works going forward to share what we learned from the pilot project and from that standpoint. But I think it's a good start. The reality is, until we get the investment in infrastructure dollars in order for us to spend the money to go beyond what we're capable of doing right now, we'll continue to just gradually slip ahead. And that's the reality. But I think we're doing an admirable job, but can always be better in that. And thanks to all your people and to all your people, Dan, and that for their efforts.
Thank you, Councillor Powers. I have no further questioners. I need a motion to receive. Moved by Councillor Powers, second by Councillor McCaddy. All those in favour? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, Daryl. We are now dealing with 8.2. funding request for energy efficient projects. Is there any discussion on item? Oh, that's the addition? Sorry, it's not in my roadmap, no. 7.2, annual update to Public Works Committee, Hamilton Cycling Committee.
Okay, it's a pleasure for me. I'm Bob Brown. I'm representing the Hamilton Cycling Committee, and we have the privilege of giving an annual update to the Public Works Committee. So it's my pleasure to do that this morning. The committee has several mandates, and you can see by this slide here that we do have some alignment with other levels of governments. The Cycle Ontario group that deal with cycling policies for the province, and also we're all familiar with our Hamilton Cycling Master Plan, which has been around for a couple of decades, I think, almost now. So we review that every 5 to 10 years and update that. So we like to address issues such as accessibility, making sure our bicycle facilities are readily available to our citizens, connectivity, allow them to efficiently bicycle to parks and educational facilities, shopping centers, and outside areas, parks and recreation areas outside of the municipal urban area. We deal a lot with safety, and I'll talk a bit about that later on as far as our education to the public for safety. And we do have partnerships with other agencies such as the Greenbelt Tourism and the Hamburg line, which you may have heard about between Hamilton and Burlington, and Green Venture and several other agencies. So this ensures coordination with transit and pedestrian mobility plans to avoid working at cross purposes, to avoid conflicts between pedestrians and transit, whether it be motor vehicles, bicycles, or other wheeled facilities. Mobility plans to avoid working at these cross purposes is one of our mandates, and to achieve an integrated transportation network. As far as education is concerned, this is part of our concentration on safety, and we have an annual education campaign which reminds motorists and cyclists to share the road, and it reinforces and builds on the success of Share the Road car magnets, which started in 2009. And I do have stickers and car magnets here, and I'll just leave them for you. Whoever would like to pick some up for their own personal use, please do so. But this has been a very effective program, and we will continue to do this in the future. So just to summarize some of the activities that we've had over 14,000 car magnets in the 6 years that we've had that program distributed. We do have banners, this one in Dundas and one across the road here in front of City Hall. We put them up a couple of times a year. We have HSR bus ads, which you've probably seen on the back of buses. We do this during June and July, and we have 10 buses for 8 weeks circulating around various routes in the city. As I mentioned, we have stickers. We also produce flyers, which are extremely popular. And we participate as much as we can in earned media, public service announcements and that sort of thing. And we have our website, which we continually update, www.cyclehamilton.ca. Our Hamilton Cycling Master Plan. The cycling infrastructure, as it states here, is an important part of making Hamilton healthier and safer for cyclists. We talk about reducing the content of gases from our motor vehicles, and we try to encourage people to cycle and to reduce those impacts on our society as far as health of our lungs are concerned. Continued improvements to the Hamilton Cycling Network. We do this at each of our meetings, and we meet 12 times a year, both for on-street and multi-use trails, which are needed to realize the concepts in our cycling master plan. And illustrated here is a photographic depiction of the Cannon bicycle track, which is just recently been painted. These are actual photos of the painting that's been done on Cannon Street looking west of Sherman. So we're excited about that project coming on, especially with PanAm and the new stadium. I'm not going to review these recent successes. We have many successes, and we've listed them by ward, and I believe you have copies of this report, so I won't go over all of these, but these are some of our recent successes and are listed here. And coming soon, we have a number of other projects here which are also listed by wards. The Sobe Bike Share, which has got a lot of media attention, the social bike availability for our city, and that's rather exciting. I think it will be implemented later on this month in more full force. The Hamburg Loop and Greenbelt cycle tourism routes are to encourage cycling between various regions, between Hamilton and Burlington, and also larger regions of the province of Ontario. So I won't review all of these, but please feel free at your leisure to take a look at the ones that we have listed here. We do have a number of projects which are coming up. They have been presented to councillors in the various wards, and I believe have received positive response. And as these are developed and designed and implemented, we would just ask that the councillors be kept informed about them, and if there are any issues, please get back through staff to our committee. We would appreciate your comments, and if there are difficulties, we would try to resolve those. So our mandate is to keep putting the pieces of the cycling master plan together. And it's just like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, and we feel that we need to keep the connectivity and the efficiency of the cycling master plan to make cycling more efficient and easier to access for our citizen cyclists. And we stress that we invite councillors to meet with our committee. As I mentioned, we meet once a month, and we have the opportunity to discuss things with councillors, and we also appreciate meetings on site and cycling tours of facilities in the various wards. I know we had last year a ride with Councillor Powers in Dundas, which was successful, and we have met with other councillors as well. So please feel free to keep the lines of communication open between the councillors and our committee. Connectivity is the key. We've kind of illustrated the City of Hamilton broken up into a jigsaw puzzle here, and some areas did not get approved in the master plan, and they kind of disrupt the connectivity and the smooth flow of bicycle facilities through our city. But we also keep in mind connectivity to our surrounding municipalities, Halton, Niagara, Brant, and Haldimand. And we do meet once a year with these surrounding communities and their bicycle committees, and we try to discuss issues that are of concern and how other municipalities have resolved those issues. So it's a very important activity that we have. Just in summary, this is an overview of progress in the past few years. You see from 2008 down to 2014, we deal with number of kilometers of major trails, bike lanes, paved shoulders, And I'm from the country, Ward 14, Robert Pizzuto's area, and I really do appreciate the paved shoulders that have been implemented in some areas, and we're hoping that that will increase. And Sharrows, which are the arrows that you see, the double arrows, look like a chevron on lanes that warn motorists and cyclists that they're going to be sharing the lane. So annual totals, and you can see that we've got, to date, 352 kilometers of bicycle facilities. So we are coming along quite rapidly. Thank you very much. That ends my update report. I'd be pleased if there are any questions.
There are a few. I have Councillors Pearson and McCaddy to start. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Good stuff. First, I would like to ask if that presentation can be sent to us by to our emails so we can have it.
You should have that on your. It was circulated this morning.
Oh, we just got it. Okay, so I will be getting it. That's fine. Thank you, because that was excellent stats that I'd like to keep track of. In one of the slides, you went back, you said what has been done. Highway number 8 in Stony Creek, Ward 10, and it's been great. So that coming soon just before that, right? Recent success is Highway 8 there. Sorry.
Oh.
Right.
Okay.
Between Highway 8, Wards 10 and 11. They've paved parts, a good chunk of shoulder, all along that route. So my next issue, and I know I haven't had a chance to follow up with Darrell Bender, is getting them marked so residents know that that is actually a bike path, because it's actually separate from the sidewalk, but it's also raised from the road. So it actually gives a very safe spot for cyclists, except for some points where there's some poles or signs, etc. But we're trying to work that. So there is a need to get markings in those stretches, and it probably won't happen until next year now, but slide just saying there's more future at King Street, if I remember. Between King and DeWitt, so that must be on the west side. So similar design, which is excellent again. And again, just a reminder and pursuing the markings so people know what it's. Cyclists especially know that's where they should be.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for those comments. And Darrell is here, so I'm sure he's noting those comments. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McCaddy.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank the committee very much for their work. All of our volunteer committees are very active, and this is certainly one that's out there on the street all the time, checking out the different options and going to Toronto and elsewhere to educate folks about Hamilton's cycling system and how effective it is, and inviting people from across the province to come visit our city. So there's certainly a tourism aspect to the work that they do as well. It's you can see by the slides up there all the action that's underway, which is just extraordinary work that's going on across the city. And thanks to the councillors as well for supporting the bike lanes and all those different parts of the city. I think we've covered the whole city in those 3 slides in terms of what is occurring and what's in the pipeline the next little while, and the number of kilometers is very, very impressive. And lastly, Mr. Chair, just thanks to Darrell Bender, our staff lead on cycling. And I know we won an award a little while ago. Was it a silver designation? We're going for gold or platinum, I guess, next. But that's due to Darrell's work and the work of the committee. Extremely active, and you can see just over the last couple of years, we've really fast-forwarded, in my mind, our whole cycling system, which makes it a lot easier for folks to change their mode of travel, at least particularly for the short trips, 5 kilometers or less, where bikes make all kinds of sense. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, I'd just like to say we appreciate the representative on our committee of Councillor McCaddy, because that was something that we've been pushing for a few years, and it finally got implemented, and we really appreciate that direct contact, and we trust that it will happen under the new council.
That's great. I have no further speakers. Thanks again for the presentation this morning, and I am going to need a motion to receive the presentation. Moved by Pasuda, seconded by McCaddy. All those in favour? Carries. Thank you. Councillor Councillor Powers.
Could I direct a question to Mr. Bender, probably, or probably more appropriate? The provincial government in their budget announced a $25 million investment in cycling programs, obviously with the should we say, intervention of Eleanor McMahon on that particular issue. Will there be an opportunity for the city to participate and benefit from that funding allocation that's proposed?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm not up on the details of that announcement yet, but thank you for flagging it, and we'll be sure to take a close look at it and get some details. Thanks.
Thanks for raising that, Councillor. Councillor McCaddy, did you ding your glass there or no? No. Okay. We're one short for quorum, so I'm going to need to come back to the committee once another member comes back and joins us, but we will move on at least for 8.1. 8.1 is the public meeting portion, so we're stuck on that one. I'll move on to 8.2. I don't believe 8.2 is a public meeting portion, if I may. We can ask questions, we can deal with the reports, and we'll come back to them for the appropriate mover and a seconder. Councillor Powers?
Certainly come to me at the appropriate time for the motion and that, but I think the initiative here is good. What I really like is the payback that's recommended, a 2.5-year payback on the investment with the monies to go back in the reserve. I think it's a very, very strategic plan that's there. I can think of other opportunities that will come off from this. Just some, I won't mention, but there are some here that I thought were some other obvious ones that are worthy of consideration. One that I thought was missing was the evolution towards the street lights. When we were in London for the AMO conference, we actually had a demonstration of the programmable LED lighting in downtown London and how it's reduced their energy costs by about 45%, and you're actually able to fine-tune the lighting. So from a computer eyes, you can actually dim the lighting down or do it up from a computer program and that. So probably not in this one, but probably in the next evolution is we clearly need to move towards the street lighting. I know we've got some challenges with street lighting, period. Dated old banks that collapse, but otherwise I think what's proposed here makes all kinds of sense, and certainly come to me for the motion whenever you're ready.
I will, and we have Councillor Jackson joining us. So I'm going to go back again to the presentation under 7.2. Clerk to re-enter. No problem. Phone on your file. Madam Clerk, a mover and a seconder then, Councillors Pasuda and McCaddy on that presentation where we mistakenly called for the vote and we didn't have quorum. So on that, all in favor? Carries. Thank you. Now on to
I would move 8.2.
We're going to move 8.2 up because we just had a discussion on it. It's been moved by Councillor Powers, seconded by Councillor McCaddy. All those in favor? That carries. Thank you. Now I'm going to go back to 8.1. Traffic management study, permanent closure. I do not have that on the roadmap here, but I'm going to call and ask if there is anyone. Thank you very much. Okay. Is there anyone in the public or in the audience today from the public who is here to speak to 8.1, which is the North End Traffic Management Study? The public notice was provided on the city's website and in the newspaper advertisements so that the requirement of the municipal class EA was fulfilled. Is there anyone here for that? Going once, twice, 3 times? Nope. Yep. Councillor Powers?
So my question is, has dialogue taken place with Councillor Farr, the ward councillor, and what's his comments on this? And if he's okay, I'm prepared to move the recommendation.
Through the chair, yes, conversations have occurred with Councillor Farr. He's in support of this measure.
Any other questions from the committee? Hearing none, I have a mover and a seconder in Councillor McCaddy. All those in favor? Carries. Thank you. 8.2 we've dealt with. 8.3 we moved up onto already on the agenda, and we've dealt with that in its entirety. 8.4 is Policy 11, Single Source Provider Extension for Project Management Advisory Services for the PanAm Stadium. Any comments or questions on 8.4? Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Powers. All those in favor? That carries. Thank you. 8.5 is the winter maintenance on city sidewalks. Any discussion on 8.5? Councillor
Just
Ferguson.
a comment, and as you know, we enjoy sidewalk clearing in Ancaster and have since probably the mid-70s. It was continued after amalgamation, but if it's being used as the benchmark, I just want to remind everyone that most residential streets in Ancaster are a rural cross-section, which means they have no sidewalks. So generally, all we do in Ancaster is plow the arterial roads, because that's where the sidewalks are. I just want to put that out there. And I would suspect where this is going to go now is be deferred to the 2015 budget. But that's my comment at this time.
I have Councillors Pearson, McCaddy, and Jackson. Councillor Pearson.
Mr. Chairman, yes, thank you. And I appreciate the comments, and certainly that this goes to budget deliberations. But I think in the interim, too, a couple of questions, a couple of issues I have that staff maybe want to also address at the time that this comes back at budget deliberations is, number one, in Ward 10, and I've raised it several times, and I'm working with staff with regards to sidewalk deficiencies in Ward 10. I have an enormous amount of old sidewalks, 30, 40 years old, that are breaking down. I'm very concerned that we're either going to have to kick up more monies to spend to do repairs and restorations before we even engage equipment such as this being put on these sidewalks. That's number one. The other is the bigger complaint that I get in the winter season is not sidewalks so much as the driveway ramps that get blocked back in when the snowplow equipment goes along. So I'm wondering if that can also be a part of the review that we have information coming forward, and I'd like to suggest that to staff today. And I'd be curious also with regards to the costing, because the information is here with regards to claims for slips and falls during winter events. But what is the cost of claims that I would have in Ward 10 on my sidewalk deficiencies? I'd like to also see that that is encompassed in a full report. Thank you.
Okay. I see staff are taking notes from some of the comments you've made, so we're in good hands that way. Councillor McCaddy.
Mr. Chair, thanking staff for the report. I was going to move to refer this to the 015 budget process, and I think the direction on that would be to come back with options, perhaps phasing, including phasing options based on the experience in other municipalities, and there are a number of examples provided to us here. And no doubt there'll be lots of questions from the next council as that goes to budget, but I think we need to get it there, so I'll make that referral with the direction of options and phasing for that. Thanks.
I'll come back to you. I have Councillor Jackson and then Councillor Powers.
So, Mr. Chairman, I know the frontline staff there are probably just going to pull out their old Jackson notes and dust them off. You know, in theory, this could be so simple, but I know practically speaking, Mr. Chairman, it's not that simple. In theory, the simplicity is, and this is mostly for Acting Director Al Doran, Roads Operation, the simplicity is that, and for now the permanent manager of winter operations, Bob Paul, who did an outstanding job during this past brutal winter season, the simplicity is the homeowners' constant complaint to me consistently over the winter seasons is they don't mind clearing their driveway approach, they don't mind clearing the city sidewalk after that snowfall, but it just infuriates them when after that first snowfall, city crews, contracted crews, whatever, under the city's umbrella, come by and redump especially a significant amount of snow back on the city sidewalk, back in front of the driveway approach. And as we all know, the second or third time, the driveway approach snow is icier, slushier, harder, and seems to be higher. And that's what, Mr. Chairman, I know I've said this refrain 100 times, that's what drives most of my constituents who complain crazy. They say, Tom, and I've had Acting Director Dorr knows, I've had past managers, I've had acting superintendents come out with me on on-site visits to see and visit and talk to the homeowners, and these are responsible homeowners who don't mind clearing their snow and doing their civic duty. But when an irresponsible, careless, insensitive driver, contractor or city comes by and takes the easy way out and just plows them right back in or dumps it right back on their city sidewalk where they no longer have access, many of them seniors, medical conditions, can't do it anymore, they just get so angry and frustrated by it. And it's conveyed through the member of council's office. So Al, you know in simple theory what's the right thing to do. We don't need all this charging homeowners extra amounts and that, even though a number of my homeowners said, Tom, I'll take that bargain that Ancaster has. If that's the kind of amount, I'll take that bargain. The other half of my constituents have said, no, we shouldn't have to go down that road, Tom. I pay enough taxes. Just tell the drivers and the crews and the plow drivers to be more careful. So that's my imparted message moving forward with now new permanent manager Bob Paul. There's got to be a way, Bob, to keep a closer oversight on both contractor crews and city crews to not plow people back in after they've done their civic duty. And I'll stop, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Powers.
For you to, Mr. Paul, on page 1 of the report, you gave us kind of 3 options to be looked at. One of them is continuing what we do now, which is looking after the, obviously, without the Ancaster factor, is we do the plowing on our own city properties. The second one is an all-inclusive, which you've estimated at $3.6 million. Third option is the arterials. Do you have any costings on the first and the third options? What's it cost us now to do our own city-owned properties, or is that basically done by the various divisions and kind of incorporated in it? Do you have an estimate for you, Mr. Chair?
Bob?
Through you to Mr. Chair. No, I don't have those costs in front of me right now. The service delivery on those are sporadic or different form than the cost estimate I provided for the all-inclusive, which was based on, like I say, on the Ancaster model, standby equipment, and on a route and going where other costs are associated with pick up and move operations, dropping the equipment off, floating it to the next spot. So there's an increased cost due to that. So I was just gave an overview based on standby type of running time.
So can I assume, Mr. Chair, as the referral motion, when it finds its way to the new council, which the new council will deal with, and I won't have to, is there'll be costing for all three of those options when they come before, and that's just a suggestion. Thank you.
I have no further speakers, and I think staff will certainly take that into account with Councillor Pearson's requests. Councillor McCaddy, I'm back to you now for the referral motion.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I would refer this item, sidewalk winter maintenance summary, to the 2015 council budget, with the direction being to come back with options, costing options, and phasing options.
Okay. Councillor Jackson.
Mr. Chairman, I'll second that, but I don't seriously, SMT members, I don't want to lose sight of coming back, Bob, to the new council, whoever's here, how you're going to tell us how you're instructing the crews, how they're doing this, and being more careful and responsible to not dump snow right back on the people's city sidewalk and or driveway approaches. I'll second it with at least that coming back with those instructions and how you're going to manage that. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Carries. Thank you. Now on to item 8.6, which is the intersection windrow removal cost estimate. It is an information report. Any questions on that?
Before I go to a motion for referral to the new year, I believe this one we have more of a responsibility for. In other words, what we're doing is we're encouraging people to use the sidewalks. The residents and the businesses at the current practice, we're asking them to, clear the sidewalks in a timely manner. But in order to get from one side of the street to the other, we've gone a long way in order to evolving the corners, if you want to call them the intersections, with the ramps. If they're clogged with snow windrows, it creates liability components. It's obviously something that once again needs to be considered by the Public Works Committee in the new term of council. But it has cost implications from a first swathe by equipment only of about 1.35 million up to a full-fledged of about $2.2 million. So I think it should have the discussion appropriate in Public Works before it finds its way to the budget discussions. So the suggestion is the report be received and that the issue be referred to the 2015 Public Works Committee for consideration for possible inclusion in the 2015 budget deliberations. I want to thank Eugene and Andrew and Rob Paul for their involvement in this. It was something that Councillor Jackson and I have kind of seized on. It's kind of an evolving process, not only with street furniture, but the kiosks and all those particular things. But the fact that Hamilton hosts the PanAm Games next year, and we need to put on as good face as possible. Creative Outdoor Advertising has done an admirable job with the equipment they've got, but as we all know, over a period of time, it's dated. It's time for renewal. I think the phasing makes all kinds of sense to make sure that the linkages taking us to the various venues for the Pan American Games is the first attack, and then obviously in 2016 we move on to the almost 300 more things. I like the design that's contemplated here, and I know we've had an extensive discussion before leading us to here. So I want to thank Eugene and Andrew for their involvement in this progressive plan. So I support Councillor Jackson's motion.
All right, Councillor Ferguson.
Yeah, I have a question for staff. I suspect it would go to Eugene. Is she the right person to answer the question? But let me ask it first, then you can see who the right person is to answer. Typically, when or in the past, when we've had street furniture, you would not put the advertising in BIA areas if requested by the BIA. Will that continue with this new vendor?
Chair, that will continue. The COA will consult. If they're putting a advertising bench into the BIA, they'll first go to the businesses that are in that area, but the city has the authority to say that we don't want a bench in that area with advertising if we so choose.
Or bus shelters, the two of them, because I think that's what applies now, benches or bus shelters.
This particular one is relating just to the benches.
Okay.
Bus shelters are a separate contract.
So just for clarity, I'll feed back to you what I think I heard. You will not install any benches with advertising on in BIA areas unless the BIA board agrees to it.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, I have no further speakers on this one. Moved by Councillor Powers, seconded by Councillor Jackson. All those in favor? Carries. Thank you. I'm now on to motions, I believe. And I have an always stop control motion that was originally supposed to be... I volunteered to do that, but now that I'm in the chair, this is for Councillor Morrow's area, and it is for Keith and Cheever Street. It's moved by Jackson, seconded by McCaddy. All those in favor? That carries. Thank you. Any other motions before I move on? I am going to notices of motion next. Notices of motion then, 10.1 tree removal. Councillor Jackson.
So, Mr. Chairman, moved by myself, so I placed the notice of motion, moved by myself, second by Ward 13 Councillor Russ Powers on 10.1 for tree removal at 166 East 42nd. To waive the rules.
Yep. All in favor?
Carried.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, it's right there in front of you, and again, in consultation with city staff, and again, based on the homeowners' long-standing history at the site, I'm asking for this support to have it removed. Second by Councillor Powers.
Yep, on 10.1. All in favor?
Carried.
Any opposed? None. Councillor Jackson, 10.2.
Moved by myself, seconded by Ward 13 Councillor Russ Powers to waive the rules on this notice of motion, please.
All in favor?
Carried.
You.
And again, Mr. Chairman, similar story. I'm asking again, the homeowners are in support to have this removed. Seconded by Councillor Powers.
All in favor?
Carried. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I believe we have added notices of motion today. 10.3 is 7 Atkins. 10.4 is 819 Garth. Councillor Whitehead is currently indisposed. Okay. Okay, they could always be brought to council or GIC if need be, or the next meeting, that's right. 10.5, installation of a stop control at Da Vinci Boulevard. Whose is this one here? Councillor Whitehead again. Members of the committee, what's your desire? Motion, okay, thank you. Any other notices of motion? None? General information or new business, members of the committee? Hearing none, I need a motion to adjourn. It's moved by Ferguson, seconded by Powers. Carried, thank you.
All these are listers.